So I get ready for bed and I go in my room and, lay in my bed. And maybe a minute later, I hear my door, creaking open very slowly. So I sit up a little bit and I said, hey, what's going on? And then he clicks the light on. He's got a 22 caliber revolver pointed right at me. And it's a situation where, remember it very vividly, and you could see the ammunition in the barrel.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestle, because if you wrestle, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
If I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the show. This is your host, Ryan Warner. My guest today is Jay Jackson. Jay wrestled and coached at Stanford in the 90s, but this conversation is about one of the craziest stories I've ever heard in terms of how wrestling can literally save someone's life. I'm not going to give away the story, just get to the episode because it's pretty incredible, the situation that Jay went through and how wrestling indeed saved his life. Fan of the week goes to my man Big Rob _18 on the gram. Really appreciate the support, my friend. Thank you. And folks, I have an update. The podcast now has a title sponsor. We're sponsored by Spartan Combat. They're a wrestling company. Same people who bring you Spartan races, but they're a wrestling company. They make gear. They sponsor the Spartan Combat RTC, which is all the Cornell guys. Maybe you've heard of them. Kyle Dake, Yanni D. They're all sponsored by Spartan Combat. And they also host events. They're hosting their first national tournament May 21st in Jacksonville, Florida. I would love to see a ton of you folks there. Check out SpartanCombat.com. SpartanCombat.com to register for their inaugural national tournament being held May 21st. And that's it, folks. Let's get to the interview with Jay Jackson. Jay Jackson, welcome to the podcast, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy and honored to be here. Love the podcast. Huge fan. And seeing your lineup of guests, I'm just incredibly humbled.
Well, we're going to thank Joe DeCena for this one. He said there was this Olympic wrestler, Jay Jackson, but no, I'm kidding, of course. But no, it's great to have you on, man. And I'm nervous about this conversation because I know we're going to go with some sensitive places. I'm excited because I don't think people fully understand just how incredible your story is through a number of angles. So let's dive right on into it, man. When did the wonderful sport of wrestling enter your life, Mr. J?
So my dad is a wrestling coach and actually a Hall of Fame wrestling coach in Washington. He wrestled at University of Washington, then he was an assistant coach there, and then he had a 35 plus year coaching career. So it's something I was always born into. And it kind of runs two generations deep. My grandpa was a wrestler. So he was an amateur wrestler and a professional wrestler in Colorado. And he actually used to go around from mining camp to mining camp and challenge people to wrestle. That's how he made money during the Depression. So it runs at least two generations deep. Plus genetically, I'm kind of predisposed to this. I was blessed with I'm not the tallest mountain in the range, and I was blessed with a lack of ability to run fast or jump high. So there's only a few sports that I can do. So thank goodness for wrestling.
And, wrestling is just the tip of the iceberg because the structure that in which you grew up, your dad, had you doing things that the normal kid can't even conceive of. So what was it like growing up with your father, and what were some of the things he had you doing at a young age?
So first off, my dad was a Green Beret, and I didn't know that until I was in 8th grade. And one of my friends came up to me and said, "Hey, I heard your dad was a Green Beret." And I went home that night and I was like, "Dad, Nick said you're a Green Beret. Is that true?" And my dad just said, "Yeah." And then that's all we talked about it for a couple of years. So pretty humble guy, but very tough. And I'm from a pretty affluent area in Washington, Mercer Island, Washington, which is a suburb of Seattle. And it's not the toughest area, I would say, because of the affluence. It's certainly not a blue collar area. And kids in my area could be maybe not as tough as say a farm kid. So my dad didn't want that. He wanted his kids to be tough. So he used to test us with things. And I'll just answer that question mostly by saying my dad did it right. And you can push really hard if you have two things, and those things are structure and support. For my dad, that structure was, I always knew that he wasn't going to do anything too crazy. I knew it was going to be something, but it wasn't going to be something he threw at me that was like way outside the realm of something I could deal with. And I also knew that there was that support. He was there to help me through the process, kind of coach me through it. And if I failed, which, is often the case, then he was going to be there. And if you have those things, you can do a lot of stuff. And I'll say, some of those things were a little crazy, not from my perspective, because I understood what was happening, but from other people's perspectives. One of those things that's going to come up later is he used to, have us wrestle blindfolded. And his thought on the thing was, and I understood this, his thought was, if you wrestle blindfolded, then when you wrestle in a match where you're not blindfolded, it's going to be easier. So I guess I won't get into the depths of how hard my dad pushed me, but let's just say he pushed hard, but it's something I always understood, and that support was always there.
Yeah, no, it's cool to see it pay off later in life. And so you wrestle, when in high school, would you say you were completely engrossed with it, or were you still juggling multiple sports and kind of didn't know which way you wanted to go yet?
So when it came to wrestling with me, I had a passion for it, and passion for me, purpose that's kind of supercharged by emotions. So my dad didn't let me start as much as I was around wrestling and watching it. My dad didn't let me start until like late 6th grade, early 7th grade. And at that point, you've got other people, you're kind of playing a little bit of catch up, but it's a good thing, because you see a direction you're going to go, and you see the purpose, and, I've got to work these things and get better so I can catch those guys, which seems to me to be a lot easier thing than being the person that's trying to stave off, all the people that are trying to catch you. And the emotion part for me is that once you start seeing your improvements and stuff, then you get pride and you kind of enjoy that feeling. So I'm kind of glad my dad started me when he did, because I've never gotten tired of the sport. Just love it. And today still love it. Man.
And what you're doing through some of the, I guess I don't know if you call it mental training, or we're going to get into that, is awesome, because it impacts kids who, maybe wrestling isn't for them, but there's still ways to kind of get that mentality. And so you get to Stanford. How did this insane story kind of come to be? And, what was your experience with it?
Yeah, you referenced earlier, this is going to be an interesting conversation. I don't talk about this stuff very much. And a lot of times when I talk about it, I go right back there. So I'm going to apologize from the get-go in case I, start stuttering or start saying or too much. But I will say it started. I went to Stanford. I wrestled there, had a decent career, and then stuck around to be an assistant coach. And when I was an assistant coach, this man, after practice, this guy comes up to me in the parking lot, and he tells me, "Hey, you live in the Greenhouse condominium complex, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "I live there too. My car broke down. Can you give me a ride?" So he tells me his name is Tony. He's from Brazil. And I give him a ride. And then at the end of the ride, he says, "My car is going to be in the shop for a while. Is it possible you can give me more rides?" And I said, "Well, practice is over about 5:30 or 6. And, I get out there, about half an hour after that time. If you're out here, then sure, that's fine with me." And I gave him maybe 4 or 5 rides during a 2-week period. And then the night this incident occurred, I get a knock at my door, and it's this guy, and I open the door. He tells me that he had told me on the rides before that he was a computer science student at Stanford, but he was also taking English classes because he's from another country. And he told me that he needed help with his English assignment. So I was like, yeah, come on in. I'll help with your English assignment. So I was helping him. And then he tells me, I'm locked out of my apartment right now, or out of my condo right now. And I'm going to go get a hotel room tonight. And I told him, don't worry about it. We'll try and get your keys. If we can't get your keys, then you can just stay here. Then after that, I had a freshman wrestlers come over just to talk. And as they came over, this guy, I'm going to answer the door. This guy makes a beeline for the bathroom and locks himself in the bathroom. So these freshman wrestlers, one being Tim Kendall, who I think you're going to interview later. Yeah. But these freshman wrestlers, I was talking to them for about 45 minutes. And then that gets overlapped with my friends who come over to the condo, and they're over for like 45 minutes. So my friends, we're going to go out that night, and they're a little uncomfortable because they're like, there's a guy in the bathroom. What's going on here? I said, everything's fine. He's a good guy. Everything's not a problem. So my friends are like, well, we want to go out to the bars. So they said, are you coming or not? So I go to knock on this guy's door, or on the bathroom door, open it. And he's in there, and he's kind of doubled over. And I said, is everything okay? And he's like, no, I just feel sick. Can I just stay here? And, I'm not terribly comfortable with that. But I said, hey, wouldn't it be better if we maybe just broke into your place? You can be there tonight. And he's like, really, I don't feel like I can move right now. Can you just please let me stay here? So I said, that's fine. I'm going to leave you a blanket and a pillow. You can stay on the couch and just get yourself better. We're going to go out to the bars, and I'll be back, and I will see you when I come back. So thank goodness I'm not a drinker, because I had my wits about me that evening. But that's how everything kind of starts off.
So were you not wondering when he's in the bathroom for an hour and a half, what the heck's going on in there? Or are you like, any red flags coming up yet?
Yeah, it's interesting, because if I were to watch like a TV show where this happened, I'd just say, what an idiot that guy is that let this guy stay in his house. But in the situation, I didn't think much of it. I'm gonna be nice. And if I were in that situation where I was sick in a bathroom, I'd want someone to let me stay at their house.
Of course.
Anyways, we come back at like 1 a.m, and my friend's not terribly comfortable with it. And he's like, I just want to check this thing out, make sure it's okay. And it's very much, again, like a bad movie. And I open the door, and this with my friend, and this guy's got the TV on, and he's laying on the couch, but he's got the cover pulled up over his face. So my friend can't really see what he looks like. And you've got the TV light that's shining on him. And I finally convinced my friend, it's all gonna be fine. I'll be good. I'll see you later. Thanks for thinking about me. So I get ready for bed, and I go in my room and, lay in my bed. And maybe a minute later, I hear my door, creaking open very slowly. So I sit up a little bit, and I said, hey, what's going on? And then he clicks the light on. He's got a 22 caliber revolver pointed right at me. And it's a situation where, remember it very vividly, and you could see the ammunition in the barrel. So I started saying, what are you doing here? What's going on? He said, don't worry about it, just roll over. And I said, what are you doing here? Just roll over. So I'm kind of stuck. There's only one door to my bedroom. It's not a very big bedroom, and he's covering that door. So I had to roll over. He stuck his knee in my back and the gun in the back of my neck. And then he started tying me up. He tied my arms behind my back, and he tied my feet together. And he brought some ribbons with him to do that, but he also took the shoelaces out of my shoes to tie me up. And then he also took some of my nice shirts and ties to tie me up, which kind of made me mad, because those things went into evidence later and I didn't get them back. Anyways, then he blindfolded me and put a pillowcase around my eyes. And then, he let me turn over and, sit up a little bit, but I'm sitting there blindfolded. My hands are binded behind my back and my feet are together, binded together. And he starts asking me a bunch of questions like, I start asking him questions like, why are you here? And at the time I was living with Chris Harpel, who's the wrestling coach at Stanford. So part of the being the assistant coach at Stanford is you got to, get free board in the Bay Area at Chris's house. So that worked out well for me. But he told me he was there because, these guys had told him that they need to get some papers from the wrestling coach. And, he said, I have the papers, so it's all good. And then, then I asked him, why do you have me tied up? He didn't answer that. For about 45 minutes, we're having a conversation, and this is before the internet is big. And he knows quite a bit about my friends, Jimmy Aguirre, Matt Cano, Ed Medina. He starts asking me questions about my friends and where they're from. And I don't know how he knows this information, but it's all starting to become weirder and weirder.
Keep going.
Okay.
Keep going. Jesus.
So
that's crazy.
So for 45 minutes, I'm talking to him, and it's bizarre because at times he would get upset with me. Like earlier that day, I'd given a freshman wrestler a ride home, and I guess he was out there and he said, I saw you with that tall, dark-haired guy. And he goes, you gave him a ride. You didn't give me a ride. So again, I don't know where this whole thing is going. And then there's times where he was talking calm to me, and that's, that was my thing. I was just trying to keep him calm. But then after 45 minutes, he's asking me like how my brother and sister and I could all go to Stanford at the same time with a dad who's a PE teacher, and I'm explaining financial aid to the guy. And it just dawns on me that hey, if I don't stop talking, he's never going to leave. So I finally turned my back to him, and didn't turn my back to him. But I said, I really, I like talking to you. I think you're a nice guy, but right now I'm blindfolded, tied up. You've got a gun and I'm scared. I said, you got these papers you said you wanted. Can you just please leave? And he tried to talk to me some more. I said, really, I don't want to talk to you. Can you just please go? And then he gagged me. He stuck a washcloth down my throat, far enough where it actually elicited a gag reflex, and then tied that around my head with another pillowcase. So now before, I'm gagged and before I could see some light, but now I'm not seeing any light. And then for the next 45 minutes, it's kind of quiet in the room. I don't know where he is. But I'll tell you what's going through my head at the time is that, look, if I can get my hands free, I'm going to be okay in the situation, because when I was younger, my dad had me wrestle blindfolded, so I'm fine being blindfolded, as I think a lot of wrestlers would be. Where body parts are if you wrestle. So I'm like, if I can get my hands on this guy, if I get my hands free and get my hands on him, then I can make something happen. Yeah. But at this point, I'm just trying to figure out where he is, because I don't know if he's got the gun, if he's in a different room, what's going on. So I finally hear him on one side of the room, and I turn my back towards him and start, because I can't talk, I'm using hand signals, and my hand signals were, I would tap myself and then say, okay, like I'm okay. And I would put my hands in a please fashion, say please. And then I'd say go with my hands. So I kept doing that. I'm okay, please go. And luckily he figured out what I was trying to say to him. And he's like, no, you're not okay. He goes, I can't bear to see you like this. And then he sits on the bed next to me. And he just says, Jay, if you just fall asleep, I promise I'll go. So then I pretended to shiver. I wasn't cold, but I wanted my hands out of sight. And again, that's the same thing with wrestling. You've got to find a way, right? You've got to be optimistic about everything. You're going to find a way to beat this guy. That's what I'm thinking mindset wise. So I shiver and he puts the covers over me. And now that's good, because now my hands are out of sight. And then he asked me, will it help you sleep if I turn the lights off? And to me, that doesn't mean anything, because I can't see anything anyways. I'm blindfolded, but I nod, yeah, I want the lights off, because now I'm going to be under the covers and the lights are going to be off, and he won't be able to see me trying to get my hands undone. So he turns the lights off, and then he lays in the bed next to me, which is, that was not a good feeling. And it certainly made me go more rapidly and think more rapidly how I'm going to get out of this. So it takes me about, I turn to face him laying in the bed. My hands are away from him, lights are out under the sheets. And it took me about 15 minutes to get my hands undone. And the side story here is that when I was a freshman at Stanford, I was the only small freshman on the traveling squad. So I got picked on occasion. I was probably a little too lippy too. So there was maybe reasons for people to do things to me. But on a couple of occasions, I got tied up by people. One time being our assistant coach, Eric Deuce, who I never thought it would help me, but day after this incident happened, I called Deuce and thanked him for saving my life. But I can tell you the first time I was tied up by my teammates or by Coach Deuce was when I kept my hands together. So my wrists were flush, and Deuce tied me up and I couldn't get out of it. It took me like an hour. So I started thinking about that. Like, next time someone ties me up, I'm going to keep my wrists apart. So next time Deuce ties me up, I keep my wrists apart, and then you've got room to move once he's gone and you can get out of there. So again, never thought I'd be thanking people for tying me up, but it certainly saved my life, as did the sport of wrestling. So I got because of that, I got my hands undone and I pulled him out in front of me. And now I've got to just locate where he is. I know he's laying on the bed, but I just want to know where his body position is.
Yeah.
So I kind of mumble something because I'm gagged, and I mumble, and he's like, what? So now I know where he's at, and I just want to make sure. So I mumbled one more time, and he's like, what is it? And then I jumped him with my hands. And as a wrestler, I'm going to say this again. Thank goodness I'm not a tennis player, and thank goodness I was a wrestler, because that's what saved my life. And thank goodness I grew up, wrestling blindfolded. Again, never thought there'd be a direct correlation, but there is.
So when you grabbed him, are you feeling like where the gun's at in case his finger's on it? I mean, can you feel the gun? So
what I did was I reached for him and then went right to his wrists.
Yeah.
And again, with wrestling, you can tell if someone's gripping something or not, if you've got their wrist, and he wasn't gripping anything. And he's yelling, I've got the gun, but I knew he wasn't, because I didn't feel that tension in his wrist. So plus, and I thought for a split second, maybe he does have the gun, but I'm like, screw this. This is my only chance. Not like I'm going to let go right now. So I went off the wrist with my right hand to the back of his head and jammed it. There's a chair next to my bed. So I jammed it between the chair next to my bed and the bed. And then we fell on the floor. He's on his back. I'm on top. We're face to face to each other, maybe a few inches away. And once I got
tied, head still covered at this point.
Correct. So once I got him on his back, then it was, I got to get inside tie, and I got to pull his arms towards his body, because that gun could be anywhere. If he reaches and grabs that thing, then, I'm a goner. So once I felt I got him pretty secure, I got the blindfold off, but it's still very dark in there, and it's very hard to see, which again, I've got the advantage in that situation, because this guy, there's no way he trained wrestling, and there's no way he had the dad that I had.
Right.
So this is weird too. The first thing I could think of to do, because I'm thinking I just gotta get this guy and, get him to stop writhing around so much. And the first thing I thought to do is double fish hook him, which the story behind that is MMA had just started at the time. And we were having a discussion in the team van, and I was talking to Todd Sermon, the late Todd Sermon, who is an All-American and a Midlands champion for Stanford. And we're saying, what would you do in an MMA fight? And Todd's like, I would totally double fish hook somebody, and double fish hooking is taking your two index fingers and putting them, it's putting them inside someone's mouth. And it's kind of what big brothers do to little brothers. And I remember Todd saying, I'd double fish hook somebody, and me telling Todd, what, that's stupid. I'd never do that. And then all of a sudden I'm in the situation. That's what I was doing. But he definitely stopped writhing around so much. And then after that, he's just, like I said, he's reaching for things. I'm trying to grab inside tie and control him. And every time I could, I'd hit him. And every time I could, I'd headbutt him. And I'd never been in a real fight before, but thank goodness I'd been in, hundreds of practice fights. So, and it was kind of nice to add the hitting and the headbutting. So I do that. And the worst part of it is he's trying to push away from me. And I've got my feet are still tied, and he's pushing off the binds that are between my feet. And it hurt like a son of a gun. But, and I will say this too, I had another assistant coach named Mike Schmidlin, who, Schmidlin, if you've never heard of him, he's I think he still has a career record for wins and pins at Midlands. He went to that tournament for over a decade, kept wrestling, and he is the toughest person I know. And Schmidlin, he lives in our area at Stanford, and he used to come into wrestling practice. And I remember, everyone, when he would walk in, everyone would try and hide, not make eye contact with him because he's so tough. And if you wrestle Schmidlin, he's going to hurt you. So basically, if he beats you, he's going to hurt you, not injure you. He's going to hurt you and make you uncomfortable so he can pin you. And if you beat him, he's going to hurt you. You just know it's going to come. So for me, I used to be the guy that didn't want to make eye contact with him, but pretty soon he's like, you're my guy. You're around my weight. I'm trained for Midlands. You're going with me regardless. And it just made me tough. At some point I realized, this is going to hurt. So I might as well enjoy it and, fight through this thing. And, it got to the point where when Schmidlin used to show up to the room, I'd get super excited. I get to wrestle with Schmidlin today. This is awesome. So those things go back to me when this guy's pushing on my binds, because I've dealt with pain before. I'm a wrestler, and I've wrestled Mike Schmidlin, and it just elevated me to a different level. So didn't let that bother me. And for 20 minutes, we're fighting on the side of the bed. He pushes down till we get to the base of the bed, and then finally to the other side of the bed. And he grabs a phone cord. And I thought, that's a pretty good idea. I'll take that from him. And I wrapped it around his neck, held him down with my two elbows, and then used my left hand to grab the phone and call 911. And that's interesting there, because this is Palo Alto, so this kind of stuff doesn't happen. And they certainly didn't believe me. So I was, and the person says, we'll send officers right away, but why is this guy here? And I started saying, he said something about these papers he wanted from the wrestling coach. And then they're like, well, what does that mean? So I said, what does that mean? And I kind of grabbed him, and he's like, well, Stanford's a rich university, and they have all this money, and the wrestling team has all this money. And I kind of lost it on him, because, I was like, we're a self-funding program, and, so it'd be an interesting police tape to listen to. Anyways,
smokes.
Police officers get to the door in just like 7 minutes. And then they say, we need supervisor's approval for them to knock down the door. I said, I'm giving you my approval. I'm in the back room. I can't get up. I'm tied up. If there's a gun somewhere, just knock down the door. And they said, well, we can't do that until, our supervisor tells us we can. And it took about 20 minutes for them to get approval. But
20 minutes.
20 minutes. Yeah. And, and at that time, and again, glad I'm a wrestler, because, I can deal with a lot more than other people can. I'm gonna say that, like Dave Schultz said, there's wrestlers and civilians. Wrestlers can deal with a lot of pain, whereas a civilian can't. Thank goodness this other guy was a civilian. So, I've got him secured, and he's kind of out of.
He's got to be exhausted.
Yeah.
I mean, you beat the shit out of him for 20 minutes, and I mean, I can't even imagine. So the cops walk in. What happens then?
Yeah, they came in guns blazing. They were shocked, and and back room's all messed up. There's blood on the walls. It's got to be just. And I'm going to quote Joe DeSena. This is like a scene out of Pulp Fiction. You got a guy half tied up and beating up this other guy. But then they hauled him out of there, and we went around the room. This guy had found a knife in the house and had brought it in the back room. And, it basically looks like he was a stalker, which is strange to me, because there's a lot better, looking people and, in the world that this guy could go after. So I'm not quite sure what was going on, but I will say super glad I had wrestling. And I will also say this, and this is me not being humble, but it's something I'm proud of. But the next day, this police officer came over, and, she was asking how I was and things like that. And she was dating one of the guys on the EMT crew that picked this guy up. And she checked on me, and that I was okay and stuff like that. And then I said, then she said, I got to tell you, she goes, the guys on the EMT crew, you're like a cult hero for them. And I just asked, why is that? And she said, because all of them said they'd never seen anyone get beat up that badly by just one person. So I'll take it. But let's go back to the theme of the podcast, but where am I without wrestling in that situation? And again, where am I without my dad? So that's, wrestling changed my life, but wrestling literally saved my life too.
Saved your life. And there's a lot that comes after it we're going to get to. Just to put a bow on this, for people who are wondering, what inspired the sicko to do all this? And like, whatever happened with that, just to put a bow on that end of it.
There's a long story that I won't get into, but he was a stalker. And they went, and interviewed him at the hospital, I guess, between times when he was vomiting blood again.
Yeah.
Strangely, it makes me feel good about myself.
Yeah.
I had been getting mail for over a year, and it was really bizarre books and things like that. And I just thought it was wrestlers on the team that were messing with me. So I had them all, and I was hanging on to them until I found out who it was, and then I was going to stick all that stuff in their locker. But when the detective was going around the room, they saw this big stack of books, and I was like, oh gosh, he's going to think I'm crazy. So I said, that stack of books, wrestlers are sending me that stuff, and that's not my stuff. And he's like, are you sure? So the detective goes and interviews this guy at the hospital, and he admitted he had been sending me that stuff. He had met me 2 weeks prior to this incident, but I'd been getting that stuff for about a year. So he had been sending that stuff, and they went to where he lived, and he lived in the corner of this apartment, and he basically had a futon and a picture of me on the wall, which again, I don't understand. But it's all like living a movie. And I'm just super happy that I didn't know about this stuff for a long time. I think there's some people that get stalked that are, constantly nervous about their stalker. I didn't know any of this was going on. And my incident only lasted, a really intense 3 hours as opposed to extending out. I will say he went to prison. And part of it's because he was from Peru, and one of my dad's wrestlers' dads. So my dad coaches high school wrestling. His wrestler's dad was the assistant to the attorney general in charge of immigration. So he got in this thing. His name's Don Reno. He's a fantastic guy, former wrestler as well. And he got in there. This guy got sentenced to 8 years in prison for kidnapping and false imprisonment. And then Don Reno made sure that this guy was deported directly after this happens. And if he ever comes back in the country, then he gets put away again. So
wow.
That's the bow.
Oh my God. So in the days after this, how did your background with discipline and wrestling help with the mental side of this and getting over it? And it's because that to me is, a big part of any traumatic situation is the days afterwards. And in a very, very, very small scale, you could say, hey, you went to nationals as a college wrestler, you didn't place, and you're depressed for months after. This has nothing to do with that, but how'd you get over some of the mental stuff afterwards? Were there any routines you used?
It was tough. I'll be honest. Emotionally, it was very, very difficult afterwards. If you're that close to death, it's a whole different scene. And and you can sit there and wallow in pity about it, like I almost died, and what if it happens again, and get yourself all nervous, or you can be the person that's like, okay, that happened, and I'm still going to deal with this emotionally, but how can I use this to make myself better? It's just like, if you lose, you reference, if you lose a tournament and you didn't wrestle well, you can wallow in pity and just feel sorry for yourself, and that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen. You're naturally going to do that because emotions are things we have. But then you got to say, okay, how am I going to fix this? And how can I use it to make me a better wrestler? In this case, I was dealing with some pretty decent emotions, but I was also doing some soul searching. And if you're someone that's gone through a near-death experience, you're going to really start thinking about what your life's about. And along with coaching wrestling at the time, I was working in an advertising agency. And that's what I thought my career was going to be. I was going to go into advertising because it sounded like fun. But then I started soul searching and saying to myself, is this something I really want to do? Am I really producing for society? And, I had to determine that, no, I wasn't. I was making like the last thing I did, I was making a menu for Armadillo Willie's barbecue restaurant, and I was trying to find armadillo fat. So I was saying to myself, that's not that powerful. So at that time, that's when I said, I'm gonna change my life here, and I'm gonna go get my teaching credentials. So I started applying to grad school after that to get my teaching credentials, because what I decided that I wanted to do is I wanted to do for other kids for students and, other young people, what my dad did for me, how to, learn to push yourself and how to deal with that stuff and, how to coach someone through that. So again, the emotions were there, and it took a while. I can say it took several months for me to say to myself, actually, I didn't think about the whole incident for 24 hours there. That's amazing. So I thought about it quite a bit, but I also wanted to use it as a way to make myself better.
Well, just think of all the kids who you've impacted now through teaching and through the Spartan program. It's really incredible to think about. So you have this horrible experience, you use it for the better, another wrestling skill. I love that. You become a teacher. Take us to the point of when you meet Joe DeSena and how the next part of your life kind of changed. That's
a crazy story too. And I think I've referenced this before, but my life is kind of like sweepstakes. Everything's fine for a while, then all of a sudden something crazy happens. And the Joe DeSena story was another example of that. For me, when I started teaching, I always tried to bring in the performance character piece. And again, this is what my dad was teaching me and coaching me through things like how to be more optimistic, how to be more committed and stuff like that. So I wanted that to be a key piece of my teaching. And as a social studies teacher, I would insert those things into lessons. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. Then I got kind of voluntold to be the assistant principal one year. So I'd been teaching for several years at this school. And then the principal came by and basically said, you're going to be the assistant principal. So great, I'll take it. It sounds like a path. Maybe I can help more kids that way. So like, I'll do it. So my first task as an assistant principal was to come up with some sort of presentation for the staff, and it was open-ended. I could do whatever I wanted. So I was trying to think of what I was going to do, and can't think of anything. So I turn on 60 Minutes Sports, and there's a segment on there called Races from Hell, and it's about obstacle course racing. And highlighted is Spartan Race and this Joe DeSena, and they're interviewing him, and he's like, well, people are kind of getting tired of flatland marathons. It's long and boring. You can't get that many people do it. So for us, we're going to make a race more exciting. We're going to toss military style obstacles in the middle there. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be difficult. People can overcome it. And at the end, they're going to hug you at the finish line. And to me, that made total sense, because for a lot of kids, their school year is just one flatland marathon with a worksheet, tests, lectures, and it's lame. So I said, why don't we do this obstacle course model at our school? And that obstacle course model would be, you got to do the lecture every so often, but give some sort of open-ended project where you can have kids really test themselves and, think about it. And I was like, while you're doing that, they're going to fail, they're eventually going to get it done, but they're going to fail through it. And you got to be able to coach them through that. So I'm like, sweet, I'm going to show this clip of Joe talking in my PowerPoint presentation. I started up and, I kind of say why school should be like an obstacle course race. And then, no joke, the very next day, my friend sends me an email, and his email says, and by the way, this is the same friend that told me in 8th grade that my dad was a Green Beret, so.
Oh, wow.
His name's Nick Morris, great guy, but I hadn't talked to him for about 15, 20 years. And I get an email from him. Nick lives out he works in New York and he lives in Connecticut. Amazing guy. And Nick is like, I met this guy named Joe DeSena. He's the CEO and founder of Spartan Race. And he said, I told him your story about your stalking story and about your dad, training you. And he goes, Joe wants to meet you. And I wrote Nick back and I was like, this is insane, because I just learned about this guy yesterday and I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation on him. Anyways, and
that just to me is so bizarre, that whole thing, because it was like OCR, obstacle course races, were in its infancy. You just happen to see something, and then the next day you get a call that the guy wants. It just, to me, is it's so insane.
Well, to me, I think there's more than luck going on.
Yeah.
And if I don't know, there's you can call it fate or whatever you want to call it, but it just seemed a little too serendipitous, for things to happen. So 8 days later, there's a race, Spartan Race in Monterey, which again, I didn't even know was there. but Joe's like, hey, I'm going to be out there in Monterey, which is about an hour and a half away from my house. He goes, you want to meet up and talk? So yeah, so I go out there, I meet Joe, and he talks to me. It's Joe and his wife, Courtney, who they're just amazing people.
Mm-hmm.
And they sat me down. Joe wants to hear the story. So I tell him the story that I told you, probably went in a little bit more depth. Not sure why, but maybe I don't know. But at the end of it, Joe's like, that's crazy. And then he's like, so he goes, you mentioned in your email something about, how what I do, deals with education. So I get into that and I start telling him, and I basically told him, what you could go around and make the circuit at schools and talk about how what you do applies to education. I said, you'd make a killing. And he's like, it'd be interesting to have an educational component to our brand. So then, and this is, I won't get too deep into this, but then Joe knows what he's doing, but he's like, he goes, this is a real interesting conversation. I want to keep it going, but I've got to go answer some emails for half an hour. You can hang out here. You can check out some obstacles. He goes, you can run the race if you want to. And so I said, well, I'll run the race. And at the time I was wearing khakis and a long sleeve cotton shirt and not running shoes, but I'm like, yeah, I'm a wrestler. It's 3 miles that I saw on the Races from Hell segment. I can pull that off. It was my wife's birthday that day, but I'm like, I'll get this done and then I'll talk to Joe and then I'll get out of here and be back for my wife's birthday dinner. So I get up there and, Joe gets me the race. And if you've ever been to a Spartan race, there's about 40 people in the pen and they're right there at the starting line. And well, I know you've done Spartan races.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a hype guy at the front. So Joe introduces me to the hype guy. And then the hype guy basically says with his microphone, everyone, this is Jay Jackson. He's a personal friend of Joe DeSanta. He's the guy to beat in this heat. And there's all these people with face paint on, their shirts off. And they're like, yeah, and I was a little nervous, in my khakis. So I jump in the middle of this group of people and they blow the horn and off I go. And we're about 3 miles into the race. And I was like, and this is where I say Joe knew exactly what he was doing. We're about 3 miles in the race and I'm kind of looking for the finish line because I'm hurting. And my feet are kind of dying a little bit. So
your wife's birthday coming up.
Exactly. So we're about 3 miles in, I'm looking for the finish line, but instead of the finish line, I see the sign off the side of me that says 10 miles to your ice cold Sierra Nevada. So I turn to the guy next to me and I'm like, how long is this race? He's like, it's a beast, man. And I was like, what's a beast? He's like, it's the 13 miles. It's a beast. So this race, instead of being the 3 miles, was a 13-mile deal, but it did push the point home for me that first of all, when you're going through something difficult, people are really cool to you. People aren't going to put you down, just like a wrestling team. Everyone knows we're going through something difficult. So let's all help each other out through it. And it was hard and I was able to overcome it. And at the end, I was really pleased. And I was like, this is what I want to do with education. So Joe finds me. By the way, my phone was lit up like a Christmas tree, with text from my wife, where are you? Are you coming back? Are you in a ditch somewhere? And I kind of had to think, yeah, kind of, at points I was in a ditch. But at the end, Joe's like, can you do this? Can you make an educational, part of the Spartan race? So that was it. And I mentioned, I talked before about, I'd always brought this performance character in, but now it was up to me to make it more concrete and organized. So what I've done since then, and that was about 8 years ago, is created this curriculum. And with performance character, it's personal to the individual. You can't just say, there's not a one size fits all thing where you can say, this is how hard you need to work, or this is how you overcome anxiety. It's going to work different for different people, but these are things we don't talk about. It's just like wrestling. Wrestling, you can ask someone how much is it physical and how much is it mental? And people are going to say at least half, maybe more, mental.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are going to say like 90% mental.
Mm-hmm.
But how much time do we spend on the mental part in the practice room? And the answer is we don't. We kind of want kids to figure it out on their own, which is, it works for some, but it's not that intentional, not that practical. I wanted to come up with a very intentional way to have people have these important conversations. So what I've got is a series of tools, and they're basically diagrams, very simple diagrams that a coach or a teacher can use to have these very important discussions about things like grit, courage, you know, quitting.
It's like optimism in there, like like positivity, I guess, would you say?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And these diagrams are coupled with questions, and obviously the coach can use the questions I give, but the coach can use more questions based on the grade level, age, or the situation. And then you're going to have you're going to have these important discussions about these things and ask kids, what are you going to do? And if they don't quite know, then they're talking to other kids about, this is what I do, and this works for me. So they can come up with a good plan with these things. Now, I will say that this program is an add-on to a pre-existing program. So it works really well with the wrestling team, because you can talk about these things all day and say, I would do this, and this is how hard I would work and stuff like that, but you don't really know how you're going to do it until you're tested on it.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, I've got a diagram on quitting, and have a lot of questions about, how far should you go? Why do you quit? When do you quit? And then after that, if you're using that with the wrestling team, then you can, have a drill where you put someone on their back, someone else on top, and let's just see. I want to see if you're going to do what you said and not give up, or if you're going to keep going. But again, I'm being very intentional about it. In a school setting, I teach world history. I always give this example, but I do it every year, where I show them a diagram on comfort zones, ask them a bunch of questions about comfort zones, so they come up with their opinions on it, and then I test them on it. And in my class, I test them by having them do a 10-act interpretive dance of the French Revolution, which is outside the comfort zone of many kids. And some of them may fail, some may do well in it, but I'm teaching the history. And at the same time, I'm teaching the performance character trait, which is, if you're going to get better, you got to get outside your comfort zone. So that's what the program's all about.
And that's just incredible to me. There's so many questions. I guess one of them would be, and you kind of already answered it, but for folks who aren't like kids who don't wrestle, or they don't do any sports, and they just don't have it in them, they're not going to be an athlete ever. Is there a way to teach these performance characteristics still? Because a lot of us feel that the only way you get those is by going through the fire, right? But right. You just kind of shared one example of something as unique as a dance to get them out of their comfort zone. So are there other things you're doing for the non-athletes out there to get them to adapt some of these skills?
Yeah. And, with wrestling, the most important thing about characteristic of wrestling is how hard it pushes you. I was never going to push myself as hard as what wrestling did for me. Right.
Right.
And, I would, if I were president, if I were dictator, I'd force every kid to wrestle. And that way you're going to find out so much more about yourself. Other kids that don't wrestle, you got to find ways to, again, discuss these things and then test them on it. So we've got like obstacle course racing, for example, those are two very similar tribes, wrestling and obstacle course racing. There's a lot of overlap between the two. Mm-hmm. And because they're both these little tribes of people that everyone thinks are so crazy, because they're pushing themselves that hard. But if you're in the tribe, then you understand why you're pushing yourself that hard. So at our school, we have on weekends, we have a group come in called Mission Peak Spartans, and they set up an obstacle course for us every Saturday and Sunday that kids can have access to. Unfortunately, most kids don't come, but they would learn something about themselves. Now, I will say it again, in school, like in my class, there's different ways to test them. It could be something as simple as a presentation they've got to give in front of class. It could be a situation where, I've got one on quitting. And then typically after I give the diagram on quitting, I'm going to give them a primary source, which is, from the 1800s, and it's got some big words and some forsooths in it. And I just want to see if kids are going to quit when they see that first big word, or if they're going to try and stay in that loop and, work and figure this thing out. Yeah. And then you can talk about it. And kids can understand, like, I quit when I saw the first word, or I pushed through this thing, which is going to make me better.
So when you talk about some of those fears or focus areas, you have quitting. What are some of the other ones that are kind of core to your training there? So
I've got different core traits like grit, commitment, optimism, when I set this thing up, and these are aligned with Joe's vision of what it takes to be a Spartan, he says, but yep. You could also say a wrestler. But if you're talking with fear and stuff like that, I've got one diagram. Basically, fear we tend to judge as a bad thing, right? But fear is something that's natural and it's necessary. It actually pumps us up with adrenaline, and it does that so we can either fight or run away from the thing that is, causing stress. So if you think about fear negatively, and I want kids to understand this, like every diagram I have just kind of says you're in control of this thing. You can control, the outcome, or you can control how you deal with this thing. So it's fear. If you look at it negatively, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose this match, or, oh my, this guy's going to beat me, or it's going to be, people are going to put it up in YouTube. It's going to be so horrible, as I get beat, then that turns into anxiety, which is a huge issue, which is something that we all deal with at the beginning. But if you think positively about fear, then you're going to be like, man, this is going to be fun. This is going to be awesome, exciting. And it turns into excitement. So, fear is something we need, and fear makes our life exciting. Like skydiving without fear is jumping from a plane, right?
Right.
A roller coaster without fear is just you going on a cart and being like, this is super boring. In fact, there's a woman that was born without, she didn't have fear because her brain, there's some problem with her brain. And all the reports on her was she was just bored out of her mind all the time. So fear is going to make life exciting, but you're going to have to deal with that. I've heard a lot of really good wrestlers talk about, I have fear before every match. And sometimes I go to the anxiety, but they find a way to turn it into excitement. So that's another core.
Man, there's just so many kids who could benefit from this. And I know, that because you meet a lot of kids, not so much for me anymore, but when I used to coach, they just don't have a sense of confidence in themselves, or just, that's the big thing. And obviously lack of confidence means you're fearing a lot of things, right? So how do you get people just to believe in themselves, or to have a good handshake, or a sense of purpose, And so does that parlay into any of this at all?
It does. But the truth is that you can't tell them this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
They've got to construct that knowledge themselves, and you've got to be put in the situation where you're going to have to, deal with it. Like I've had kids that I've coached in wrestling that you can tell they're nervous wrecks before the match. And I've got other kids that are excited. With the kid that's a nervous wreck, hey, let's look at this diagram. What are some things you're going to do? And it's good to have group discussions with this diagram, because the kids that do a good job with it are going to say, this is what I do. And it can give other kids, it actually has the kids grow together, and it can give them ideas on how they can better themselves. But the truth of the matter is they're going to have to be the one that is in control of it and makes the decision themselves. I'm just trying to give them, help them make educated decisions about that. And I will say this too. And, I don't know if you want to get into this yet or not, but just kind of wrap up my story. But I thought that I understood these concepts, but the good thing about, Joe DeSena and Spartan Race is it introduced me to a lot of amazing people that run these ultra marathons and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I have these outliers, plus, I'm working with Beat the Streets with this material, and I get to talk to some really high level wrestlers and coaches and stuff. And these people are outliers. So I want to learn from them. So I'm using these diagrams and asking those questions, and they're coming up with ideas that I never thought of. This is how I deal with that. And, again, I made the diagrams and stuff, but I didn't really understand them. I still don't think I fully understand them. But outliers were giving me really good ideas and on what to practice and stuff like that when it comes to optimism and courage and commitment and things like that. And after a while, I was like, okay, if I have another challenge, this is how I want to deal with it. And lo and behold, at our weekend obs course training, if you want kids to show up, you better model it yourself. So I go out there all the time. I was on the monkey bars and started feeling all woozy and weird. And it turns out I was having a stroke. So what I had was an AVM, which is it's a cluster of blood vessels that you're born with in your brain, and it's going to go off at some point. Mine chose 2.5 years ago to go off. So
was it painful when that happened, or how did you know you were experiencing it?
Yeah, I didn't know, because my assumption was that my face would droop if it was a stroke and it would be painful, but it wasn't painful at all. In fact, it was, I guess I would liken it to just being at one with the universe. It's bizarre. I don't want it to happen again. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
But I didn't really care what people were saying, you know, because I just wanted to be there and be in this state of being. I didn't know where my body began and ended. It was just super weird. But it was when I started thinking to myself, you know, gosh, this isn't normal. That's when I started getting a little nervous, like something might be going on here. But then I'd drift back into not caring anymore. But my entire right side was paralyzed, and you know, got carted off to the hospital and was in the ICU. Tough part was, you know, first being in the ICU, I have two boys, and they're not used to seeing me like this, and they're seeing me they're walking past room after room of people that are just in dire straits. And then I'm all hooked up to all this stuff, you know? So, and at that point I was like, you know, you can feel sorry for yourself again, or you can be like, here's a challenge, let's go, you know? And again, God bless my dad and wrestling, you know, to give me those things. And I was like, all right. And I also was able to talk to a bunch of people about how I wanted to take on a challenge. And I was like, this is a great opportunity for me to deal with that. And it was, you know, I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks, obviously not in ICU for that long.
3 weeks is a long time though for a stroke.
Well, it was all the rehab from the paralysis. Yeah. And, you know, I've got all my motion back and everything's good. I'm actually get to wrestle again.
Wow.
So it's, and they're able to do brain surgery on me and take out this AVM. So I should be smooth sailing for a while. But you know,
so when you told me this story for the first time, and for folks who are listening, I know you're just blown away at the number of things we've covered here, but specific to the stroke incident, I remember you telling me the first time you're on the playground, you have it happen, and you're in the hospital, and you kind of already alluded to this, but they told you what happened. You're like, good, like I get to really put this stuff to the test, you know, because as an instructor, you were probably feeling like, man, I know how to do this stuff. I've been teaching it. I got it down. But now it's, hey, your life's on the line. Let's see if you can actually do it now. And so your reaction to that was excitement, as you alluded to.
Right. You know, and it's not easy. It's not easy to get there. And I had my doubts. We all do. Right. You know, you're going to have those doubts, but I'm like, no, this is how I want to deal with this. It's just like, well, and you're right. When I was in the ICU, this much too young looking doctor came in and he's like, hey, you had a major stroke. This is going to be a long and difficult process to get your, you know, feeling back in your right side. And, you know, at that point I was just pumping myself up and like, let's go, you know, I got this. Let's make this happen. I also say, like, when I had the brain surgery, they told me I was having brain surgery. As my wife was driving me in a car. I couldn't drive at the time. And they called me up and said, you're gonna have brain surgery. Immediately those negative thoughts came in. Like, what if I die? Brain surgery is very difficult. Like, so for me, I had to work through those things by every time I'd have a negative thought, like what if they mess up and I'm paralyzed for life? I had to say two positive thoughts. Like, these doctors are the best in the world. And once I get this thing out of here, it's all done. And, you know, to be honest, and I hate to use this word, but I was excited for the surgery that morning. I was like, let's go. And I will say, at the end of my stint at the rehab hospital, I got out of there a little bit early. They were planning on keeping me there for about 4.5 weeks. But I had a couple residents and a couple, you know, doctors come in and just basically ask, what did you do? You know, how did you do this? Now, part of it was because I'm not the oldest stroke person that got in a stroke, and that, you know, certainly helped out. But yeah, I really believe it's all the training I got and the optimism that comes with challenging yourself with the sport like wrestling. I'll also say, to wrap this with a nice bow, my parents flew into town at the end of my you know, my time, because they wanted to see me. And my dad, you know, never told me this, but in his head, he's like, I just want to see him walk. You know, I want to see my kid walk. So when I got home, I had a cane, but I was like, I don't really need this. And I walked home, and it's one of the 2 times I saw my dad cry. You know, you know, he cried when I won a state title, which is very emotional for me too, because I was wrestling for my dad, because he's such an amazing guy. And then, you know, saw him cry at that time too. So, and again, let's thank wrestling for all that.
Oh,
I doubt I'd be that close with my dad without the sport. It helps you understand each other and really, understand hardships and, supporting people.
Thank you for sharing that. Now I mean, we can all say, yeah, you're right. And we kind of know what you mean, but not really until you've been there on, death's door in a sense of, hey, you're going to have a serious operation. How long between the stroke and the surgery?
So that was it was a few months.
So you're sitting there at home out of commish, trying to get yourself back, but really the rehab wasn't even starting until after the surgery essentially, or were you rehabbing during that time leading up to it?
I was rehabbing during that time. In fact, I wasn't supposed to go jogging, but don't tell my wife this, maybe she won't listen. But yeah, I would kind of push myself and I'd say I'd go for walks, but then I'd start jogging, and I took maybe 4 headers in my neighborhood. And strange thing is
because you fell over from the running.
Yeah. I couldn't pick up my foot that high, and I'd hit like some crack, and strangely, it was always in front of somebody. It was like a couple people working on a car, and I'd have to bite it in front of them. But again, I think you can do a lot more than you think you can, and if you've gone, like I said, I wouldn't, before wrestling started, I wouldn't think I'd be able to make it through a practice, and before college, I don't think I'd make it through a college practice, but you start, gaining that belief, and you can do a lot more than you think you can. Again, through just challenge and people helping you out and support.
It's just amazing how, to your point exactly, the body is insanely resilient. It could run hundreds of miles. We've seen it. It can do a lot of things. And I wanted to ask you, do you think the mind puts all these doubts and trepidations in our mind to protect us? Or why does the mind do that right before we're getting ready to do something that is going to be rewarding, and you only get that great feeling after a difficult task, but right before you start, the mind's always like, let's not do this. Why do you think that is?
I think because the mind is programmed to quit. That's what's happening. Because if you did something and you never quit, then you'd perish, you'd die. Mm-hmm. Like if I went out for a run and I never stopped, then I would die. So your brain is pre-programmed to do that. And I think back when we really had hardships, like in caveman days, you're going to try and quit as soon as you can, because life is super hard. So you want to take breaks and stuff like that. But our life is not as tough as it is then, but we still have the quit in us. But I can say if you can, there's a point where you're going to have to quit everything you start, without a doubt. And there's reasons for quitting, but your brain's going to tell you to quit, every step along the way. And if you can kind of push past that and realize where your limit is, then you're going to be a lot better. But you and I both know this, that where I stop, there's always more that I can do. I've never gotten to the point, I've never worked out hard enough where I passed out, or done something where I've died, thankfully.
Right. But I know what you're saying though. It's like, there's reasons to stop and there's reasons not to. And obviously there's limits to that, but it's just amazing to see you living all this out. And just to wind down here, after the surgery, your father's there. It's an emotional moment. What have you been up to since? You're still a teacher. For folks who aren't watching this, Jay's in his classroom right now, but are you back to being an assistant principal, or did you change another course after that surgery?
No, I changed course because, well, it was actually before the surgery I changed course. Being assistant principal it wasn't really feeding my purpose. I want to make kids better. And it was a lot of paperwork and a lot of, spending time with the same kids that were having issues. And I could help those kids, I thought, but I think in the classroom I could help more kids. So I left after 4 years of being an assistant principal. I came back to classroom so I could actually use the curriculum on my students and work with it and test it. At the same time, I'm coaching. So I'm coaching a junior high team and I'm going to pick up a high school team next year. But for me, when it comes to coaching, I want to make them better people. Right. So my curriculum is really important, and I could care less if they win or lose. I just want them to be better people. And I think that if you make them better people, then the wins are going to come, right? If you're trying hard, if you're committed, if you're optimistic, all these things. And it doesn't mean it doesn't mean we're just going to talk all practice, every practice, but we have this 10-minute conversation. I think it brings out more in them. And because of my connections with Spartan Race, I've gotten connected with some nonprofits that are using the curriculum. I get to work with Beat the Streets, which is the best. We have Beat the Streets Bay Area here. And again, Beat the Streets, and the guy that's in charge that kind of sets everything up here is Daniel McCune, incredible guy. But you know, the purpose of Beat the Streets is to use the sport of wrestling as a vehicle to help kids better themselves, right? And get out of their situation. And if you don't add the mental piece to that, then and you're hoping the kids find out on their own, then you're not going to be as good at making that happen. So it's fun for me to do that. So if I do get like a sports team or a business or, you know, a nonprofit that wants to use this stuff, then I'm very willing to share. I just think it's my purpose and my passion, you know, based on you've heard the story, but I just want people to understand, you know, how they can potentially be better and happier. And if I get to do that, then that's something that I want.
Well, you said something there that stuck in my mind. Without the mental piece, you know, you can do a lot of wrestling. Without the mental piece, though, some of the lessons might not stick. And I've often thought that because we all know a lot of wrestlers who are absolute knuckleheads, who aren't good people. Maybe they're alcoholics. Maybe they were kind of douchebags. I don't know, right? I mean, so it often makes me wonder. I'm like, well, is wrestling really that great? Because look at all these guys that I know, a lot of them that are kind of losers now. But maybe you said something that stuck out. It's like, well, maybe they were just around a coach that was really good at putting them through the workouts, but not the mental piece, right? And so they're tough, they're physically tough, they can beat up anyone, but they're not a good person. And so I wonder if that's the piece that's missing, because I often think about that. And I know every sport has knuckleheads, but you know what I mean, though?
That's something that eats at me too. Like, I just don't understand how the lessons that you learn from wrestling don't translate to other parts of your life.
Right.
You know, so for example, the athlete that does really well in wrestling, like you referenced, you know, not trying hard in school. That makes no sense to me.
Can't understand it. Yeah.
And, you know, that's a nut that maybe you and I can crack when we talk later.
Right.
But I'd like to get to that, because I really think that if you wrestle, you're different. You're a different breed. And it should be like, if you get a test, or if you get a term paper that you're going to do, you're like, this is nothing. You know, I got this. I can make this happen. So, you know,
I wrestle with that though. You know, that same thing you're talking about though. It's like, and I tell people that if I'm helping someone get a job, you know, there's nothing more scary than starting a new job. But then I say, look at all those people who are doing it. They're not freaking wrestlers. There's no way they've been through anything close to what you've been through, you know? And so if you know how to harness that, and it's a learning process for all of us, you know, that it's go ahead.
That might be part of my discussions. Like, hey, you're doing this in wrestling, you know, can you apply this to other things? Can you apply this optimism that you use to make yourself better to other areas in your life? Or do you just believe that, you know, I'm just stupid and I can't learn math?
Right.
You know, so that's a piece maybe in having this brief discussion about this, that maybe I should add to what I'm doing.
Well, I think it's something where what you're doing is incredible, and it's helping. I can't even imagine how many people. And, you know, knowing you're back in the classroom is awesome, because you told the story about being a principal. I'm like, that's pretty cool, but I bet your students are heartbroken when you had to leave the classroom. So I'm glad you're back in there now in the trenches. And man, I'm excited just to see, you know, how much we learned from each other over the years, Jay, and to continue the friendship, because it's been awesome. And just these 2 calls we've had, they haven't been brief. Both of them have been about an hour like this. So I really appreciate you redrudging some of these stories just to convey the importance of the lessons we're talking about here. And so greatly appreciate your time and your transparency coming on the show, Jay.
Hey, appreciate it. And I'll say it again. I just really love what you're doing for the sport of wrestling. And if someone listens to your podcast, they can feel the passion and the effort. And, you know, those are, if we're talking something that translates over, guaranteed you learn those things in wrestling, or at least they're reinforced for wrestling. And then they're moving into this area of your life. And I'm on number 4 of the Smiths series, and they are fantastic. I get so lost in them and then afterwards I start thinking about, oh my gosh, the passion that this took and the effort that this took, it's astounding. So keep doing what you're doing. The sport loves you for it. And I'm just so grateful for you and what you're all about.
Thank you, Jay Jackson. I appreciate it, sir. First or second of many conversations I hope to have with you in the future. And all great things must come to an end. If you want to hear more from the podcast, text Wrestle to 555-888. That's Wrestle to 555-888. You can also find us on Instagram, Wrestling Changed My Life, Twitter, Ryan_N_Warner, as well as our website, WrestlingChangedMyLife.com. Take care, y'all.